Recapping the week that was, the Combine and Indy, my biggest takeaways, that plus a whole lot more coming up on Monday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for March 4th, 2024.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won, and won, and won, and won, and won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. As always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, definitely appreciate you. Show is growing in a major way, continues to grow in a major way each and every day, and that's because of you, Raider Nation. We appreciate that. And, of course, because of my man Ari, who does a great job each and every day, making sure we're on YouTube, looking good and sounding good. So big shout out to him. Check him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line 707-654-4693. We'll get your calls and texts coming up in segment number 3 as we're back home. Great to be back home. It was fun to be in Indianapolis. It was great to be at the Combine, be able to bring you everything that I could. But man, oh man, there's no place like home, right? Feels so good to be back. But as I mentioned, we'll get your calls and texts in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about if the Raiders don't go quarterback at number 13, or if they trade up and get quarterback. If they don't go quarterback in the first round, who could they go after? What other positions could be available that the Raiders could go and draft and make their team that much better? I got a handful of guys that we'll talk about in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, just kind of news and notes, recap, just my overall takes from what was going on at the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. Again, a great time to be there. I was blessed to have the opportunity to run across a bunch of players, a bunch of scouts, a bunch of GMs, a bunch of coaches, and just, NFL draft guys in general. So really good to be back, but it was a great opportunity to be there in Indianapolis. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of today's show, which is FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. And let me tell you this. Just looking at all the talent, there was 321 guys that were there at the Combine in Indianapolis. It went through from Monday through Sunday, and I took off early Saturday morning. But I'll tell you right now, man, between the offensive line, wide receivers, cornerbacks, defensive line, there was so much talent there in Indianapolis. I feel really good about the opportunity for the Raiders to improve their team. And the thing about it is, we've all talked about quarterbacks in a great length. And of course, we're going to continue to talk about quarterbacks. That's the most important position on the team. We know that. But the Raiders and the personalities of Antonio Pierce, Tom Telesco, what he's been able to do in the past as far as the guys that he's drafted, I feel like they have an opportunity to really build this team and get some real dudes, like some guys with some real grit, some guys that got a little something in their neck, right? A little edge to them to really bolster the Raiders team in general. So I'm really excited about the direction that they can go and the opportunity that they have, especially because just the personality of the guys that are going to be pulling the trigger, especially after having an opportunity to talk to not only Tom Telesco, but Antonio Pierce in great length there in Indianapolis. One guy that we talked about, and we've been talking about quite a bit, is Jaden Daniels, obviously the quarterback from LSU. And, I asked him while he was at the podium on Friday, what his meetings were like with the Raiders, and he tried to downplay it a little bit. It's great. AP is a great guy. I've got a relationship with him, but everybody on the staff was great. So he kind of downplayed it a little bit, but I thought it was great when Josina Anderson from CBS Sports basically just came on out and said, hey, if you get a call on draft day and it's AP on the other end of things, what would it be like? So here's a quick little 45 seconds of what Josina Anderson said to Jaden Daniels on Friday at the Scouting Combine. Check it out.
Your relationship with Antonio Pierce, obviously back to your days at Arizona State as your recruiting coordinator. Now, the thing that's probably interesting, too, is the teams that potentially could come up for you. Right. What do you think is the potential that AP, he's talked about how much he knows you, could potentially come up for you?
Man, we're going to see. We are going to see. AP is a great guy. He's the right guy for the job. And if he did and I hear my name called and on draft day I hear my phone call ring and it's AP, I don't know what I'll do. So we'll see. But Right now, I'm just blessed. I'll take it day by day. I'll let everybody handle that. That's what they're for. I'm focused on being the best player, the best version of myself.
So I thought that was really cool, especially the fact that he couldn't really stop himself from smiling and laughing and giggling. And, just obviously it would be a big honor for him to be able to play for Antonio Pierce. We know that they've got the relationship. I tried not to make it too big of a deal, but just, hey, what's it like, having sit-down meetings with AP. And, of course, AP has talked about him in great length as well. We talked about him when we all had that sit-down with Antonio Pierce early in the week while we were in Indianapolis. And so clearly that's QB1 for the Raiders. It doesn't mean that they're going to be able to get him. They're going to have to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to do that. As I mentioned last week, probably have to jump up all the way to number 2 as opposed to number 3 to go get him. I think the Washington Commanders would definitely be in business to go ahead and make a trade with the Raiders, but I do think that they're going to have to do some drastic measures to go get him, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to. Now, there's a lot of different players that the Raiders could go draft if they don't go get a quarterback at number 13, or if they don't be able to trade up and go get a guy like Jaden Daniels, and we'll talk a lot more about that coming up in segment number 2. But here's one guy. You want to talk about a guy with his head on his shoulders that I would definitely have no problem if the Raiders went and drafted? Terrion Arnold, the cornerback from Alabama. He was at the podium, and he just had some really good things to say. He had some really good things to say all week long. He showed out when he was going through the drills for the cornerback. He'll probably be the first QB or cornerback taken off the board. He'll be the first one drafted. I think it'll be between him and Quinyon Mitchell. But I think with what he was able to do over the course of the drills that they were going through, probably solidified himself as cornerback number 1. But here he is at the podium talking about a couple different subjects, including what the whole process and the moment has meant to him.
It's deja vu. I've already seen it in the dream. I was in front of y'all, talking to y'all, and this moment to me, it means everything. Because I'm the type of person that really loves football. And I just feel like I'm very blessed and highly favored. So I give all the glory to God. And it's just a testament kind of my faith, the way I was raised. And I always like to say my favorite Bible verse is Matthew 25:12. And it just talks about he who humbles himself shall be exalted, and he who exalts himself shall be humbled. So I humble myself. I treat everybody with respect. I know to treat the janitor like the CEO. You never know who you'll come in contact with. And at the end of the day, man, you just want to give your family a good last name and try to leave a legacy.
Your growth this year, I probably feel great. I don't feel this more to do.
Honestly, I'll tell you this. At Alabama in 2022, my redshirt freshman year, after we played Tennessee, I got benched. And I've been telling all the NFL teams that right there, it changed everything for me. I kind of like to say I had my Michael Jordan moment. I write it down every day. Eli Ricks, that's my brother. But when I got benched and replaced for him, it motivated me. I write it down every day and say I refuse to ever let that happen again. And that's what's going to lead me and take me to getting that gold jacket, which is the Hall of Fame. The gold jacket, and I ain't talking about the one you could buy. So that moment right there, from then on, I refuse to let that happen ever again.
Have you had a chance to meet with the Raiders yet?
Yes, sir.
How'd that go, and meeting Antonio Pierce and talking to Coach?
He's a guy full of energy, man. When I walked in the room, he was like, "Are you an energetic person?" I was like, "You know I am, man. Cut on the tape." He was like, "Man, I like you already." So, it went very well.
Now, I don't know about you, but that guy's got his head on straight. He really does. You could tell that the main thing is the main thing. And once he got benched, like he mentioned, he wasn't going to let that happen again. And all he's been doing is putting his head down and going to work and being the best cornerback he could be. And, the Raiders have a need, right? The Raiders definitely have a need across from Jack Jones. Antonio Pierce mentioned it last week. He'd like to have one more guy. Could you imagine having, Jack Jones, Nate Hobbs in the slot, and then a guy like Terrion Arnold there on the other outside? That'd be a pretty salty defensive back room as far as I'm concerned. Now, who knows when he's going to get drafted, but I do think that he's going to be probably the first cornerback taken off the board. Another thing that came out of the scouting combine in Indy last week was the fact that Michael Penix got a clear bill of health, something I've been talking about quite a bit. That dude, the most important part of the combine for him was going to be the medicals, and it all came out really well, right? He hasn't been injured in 2 years. All his injuries he suffered at Indiana, didn't suffer any at Washington, led the Huskies to the national championship game. Now, they lost, but he still had a hell of a season. And then when he went and threw the ball, he threw the ball. He was outstanding with the ball in his hands on Saturday. Just had some nice place balls. The deep ball, of course, is his forte. I think Michael Penix could be a real deal player and could be in line for the Raiders, right? If they can't go get a Jaden Daniels, if they have to wait, maybe they get a Michael Penix at 13. Maybe they wait. Maybe he drops a little bit. Maybe he goes into the second round, or maybe they trade into the back end of round 1 like the Ravens did with Lamar Jackson, and the Raiders are able to get him. I think Michael Penix would definitely be an intriguing quarterback for the silver and black. Jaden Daniels is still QB1 for me. Michael Penix, as he was before the combine, is still QB2, but I would definitely be intrigued by both of those guys. Jaden Daniels for obvious reasons, but Michael Penix, I think, could bring a lot to the table, especially because he got a good, clear bill of health with his medicals there at the combine. I think that goes a long ways. But what about the Raiders if they can't get a quarterback in round one? I got 5 players that the Raiders could target, if not a QB in round one. I got that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. We'll get to that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. We all know it's NBA season. It's getting down to the wire. The playoffs will be here sooner rather than later. Right now, you need to get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins, just like that. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and a whole lot more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. You know you're guaranteed to miss a shot that you don't take. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. So if it's not a quarterback in round one, then who or what? And I'll tell you, from being at the Combine in Indy all week long and being able to see these players up close and personal and hear what they had to say, I came away with, wow, there's a lot of players that would really intrigue me and really help bolster this Raiders roster. I mean, from defensive linemen to cornerbacks to offensive tackles. I mean, there's guys out there that can get it done. I feel like the wide receiver position, that would be a luxury if the Raiders went with a wide receiver. Running back position, that would be a luxury if they went with a running back, at least early, right? They don't need to go after a running back early, but between defensive tackles, cornerbacks, offensive linemen, especially tackles in general, man, there could be some really good additions to this Raiders team. So no quarterback in round one. Let's just say the Raiders try to trade up and they can't get there. So by the time they get there at number 13, they don't have the quarterback that they want. And maybe they're trying to even go get Michael Penix a little bit later. So what are they going to do at number 13? First up, Byron Murphy, the big defensive tackle from Texas. That dude is an absolute man. A man-child. Like, the dude is a monster. He's a guy that would be the best defensive tackle the Raiders have had since Darrell Russell. And he's just a guy that he's not Aaron Donald. I want to put that on him. Aaron Donald's a Hall of Famer, but he's a guy that can get to the quarterback from the defensive tackle position. He would be the Raiders version of Chris Jones, right? And of course, Chris Jones is a hell of a player as well, but he's got those traits. Byron Murphy has those Chris Jones type traits. Of course, he can stop the run. He could plug up the gap in the middle, but he can get to the quarterback as well. I would be very much in line with Byron Murphy if the Raiders decided that they wanted to go that direction at number 13. And, Antonio Pierce mentioned it. We talked to him for about a half an hour. You heard that on, Thursday's podcast last week, and he talked about the defensive line. He talked about, having some dominant defensive tackles. That's who he's talking about right there, a guy like Byron Murphy or Byron Murphy in general. That is an extra special dude, and if he's there at number 13, I would have no problem at all if the Raiders went and selected him. I think he'd be a really good option for that defensive line. And when I asked Byron Murphy about meeting with the Raiders, he said he met with them, and he said he would love to play alongside Max Crosby and make his job that much easier. Could you imagine a defensive line of Max Crosby, Byron Murphy, you got Malcolm Kuntz, you got Tyree Wilson still to add to the mix? That would be very intriguing. And on a side note, when it comes to Tyree Wilson, I do think that there's a day in time where he may end up just transitioning and being in the interior of the Raiders defensive line. I don't know if it's right away. I've had people ask me about it, and I think that the Raiders are going to still give him a couple opportunities at the edge, but he has shown that he could play in the interior, and that's something that AP had mentioned him to us before we started recording, before we actually sat down and talked with us. He kind of compared Tyree Wilson to Justin Tuck. He said Justin Tuck struggled early on trying to get to the quarterback from the edge. They put him in the interior. He went up against some guards, and he dominated them. So that's what we did with Tyree Wilson at the end of last year, put him inside, and he dominated those guards. So there's a world where I see Tyree Wilson being interior of the Raiders defensive line, but I don't think it's just yet. But Byron Murphy would be an absolute dude at that spot. So that's one guy. How about Terrion Arnold? Mentioned him. You heard from him in segment number 1. Again, I don't really have to go into deep detail. I say DBs win games all the time. That would be a DB that I'd be very intrigued by. Again, Nate Hobbs in the slot, and you have Jack Jones, and you have Arnold on the two outsides. That would be a dominant secondary. It really would, especially if you have a defensive line that's getting to the quarterback. Those guys could be all over the wide receivers, real sticky. I would love to see that. Plus, they're physical. All three of those guys are physical, and that's what I think the Raiders really need is physicality in the secondary. And again, Nate Hobbs, we know he's as physical as it gets. We saw what Jack Jones brought to the table, and Terrion Arnold. If you haven't watched enough Alabama football, well, shame on you. Go check it out. He can do that. Sticking with the cornerback position, Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo. He's a guy who went to the Senior Bowl. And he said, I wanted to play with the big dogs. I wanted to show that I can compete with the big dogs. His words, not mine. He said that at the podium last week during the combine. He said, that's the reason I went there. I had a really good experience. Wanted to go out there and show those guys what I can make, what I could be, right? And when he's saying show those guys, he's talking about the rest of the league. So I think Quinyon Mitchell would be a DB that I'd be very intrigued by as well. But I'll tell you, Terrion Arnold would be DB1 for me. I had at one point Quinyon Mitchell at DB1. But after the week that was, I got Terrion Arnold now, DB1, Quinyon Mitchell there at number 2. How about offensive lineman? How about hold on, I'm about to get his name wrong. Talisu Fuaga. Talisu Fuaga, say that 3 times fast. The offensive tackle from Oregon State. Watching those drills, and I was already at home when the offensive linemen were going through their drills, but watching those drills on NFL Network on Sunday, the offensive linemen were getting after it. Fuaga was a man-child. I mean, the dude was just absolutely fast. He looked like a mauler and a guy that Daniel Jeremiah broke down. He said he's mean. He said, well, what do you mean by mean? He's like, he didn't get penalties because of the way that he blocked and the pancakes that he put on defensive linemen. He got penalties. He got 15-yard penalties because he would block them, he'd get the pancake, and then he'd jump on top of them. So he plays through the whistle. He's got that kind of nasty that you want your offensive lineman. So that's one that I'd definitely be intrigued by. Talisu Fuaga. I'll get his name right by the time the draft comes around. But Talisu Fuaga from Oregon State looks like a dude that the Raiders, if they were to grab him at number 13, slide him into that right tackle spot, could hold that spot down. And we all know that has been a problem for the Raiders for so many years. As a matter of fact, I got another offensive lineman that I would slide into that right tackle spot as well if they weren't able to get Fuaga, and that's Troy Fautanu. See, Fuatunu. Yeah, Fuatunu. Yeah, exactly. Good luck, Q. Good luck with all these names. But Troy Fuatunu from Washington, he's offensive tackle as well. He's another monster. He's another dude that can get after it, and that offensive line at Washington was really good. Right, Michael Penix didn't have to do a whole lot of anything, didn't have to scramble too much because that offensive line pretty much kept him clean, and Troy was one of the big-time players there that can do it. So that's another offensive lineman that I'm looking at thinking that the Raiders could really do a good job if they were to go get him. Again, I think the Raiders could go D-tackle, cornerback, offensive line. They have a lot of different options there at number 13 if they're not able to go and get their cornerback or quarterback. And I'll even say this, Amarius Mims, the offensive tackle from Georgia, J.C. Latham, offensive tackle from Alabama, probably get those guys too. You might even be able to trade back a little bit, go from 13 to like 16 or 17 and still get those guys and feel pretty good about the right tackle position. The thing that stands out to me the most is that this draft class is so deep with tackles and cornerbacks that I think that right tackle spot that's been a problem for so long should be solidified this year. And I know that Tom Telesco, the Raiders GM, wants to build through the trenches. Like, that's what he really wants to do. You go back and look what's going on with the Chargers. You see that he's added work to the defensive line, and he's added some quality players to the offensive line. So you know that that's where he wants to focus in on. He told us that last week as well, that the trenches are something that he wants to focus in on. So I think that they're going to try to do everything that they can to get their quarterback. I think that they really want to go and get Jaden Daniels, and they know that they're going to have to go all the way up to 2 or 3 at the worst to go get him. But if they're not able to get that, I mean, you look at a Byron Murphy, a Terrion Arnold, Talisu Fuaga, Troy Fontendu. No, that's not how you say it. Fautanu. Fautanu. There you go. Sound like that old video game. Remember what game was that? What, Street Fighter or whatever? Sound like that. Fautanu. That's how I'm gonna remember his name. He's a stud offensive tackle, and then Quinyon Mitchell as well. Those all could be players that the Raiders could roll with if they, at number 13, or even maybe trade back a little bit if they're not able to get their quarterback. But obviously, identifying QB1 and getting QB1 is going to be their biggest task at hand as they lead up to April 25th draft. But we'll see what happens in between now and then. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be intriguing. But I'll tell you what, man, there's so much talent that was at the Combine in Indy. I really feel like that this team is going to have some nasty to it. It's going to have some bully to it, and it's going to have a lot of stinking talent between AP and Tom Telesco and others. Identifying the talent that they want to add to the Raiders roster is something to get really excited about the opportunity to see this team grow in a major way. But that's what I got for you for segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts come up in segment number 3, 707-654-4693. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors here on the show, and that is BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. And for us, it's all different. Each and every individual, it's always going to be a little bit different. But again, therapy can help you figure out a way to make it happen. If you're thinking about starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Let BetterHelp find a better you. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts draft that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Start things off with a call from Raider X. He's calling to talk about what we talked about in segment number 2. If not a quarterback in round 1, then who? And does a little bit of deep dive. And here he is, Raider X.
Hey, Q, this is Raider X. Just wanted to, touch upon, probably going to be talking about the Indy Combine and all the information and interviews and stats you shared. Some of the trade stuff I wanted to really talk about is that, learning that, it doesn't look likely, and it looks like it'd probably be too much going up to those top 3. And given that those top 3, have different skill sets and, the Raiders might really only fall in love with one, it's not guaranteed that they're able to even get it. So now you really got to start looking at the, those second tier or the ones that are least likely to be those great stars. Whoever knows, Well, the Penix, the Bo Nix, who knows? I mean, who knows? J.J. McCarthy. But I think that what also says is gives the Raiders the ability to go get, that Brian Murphy. You get somebody like Brian Murphy, that whole line changes. Or you get that cornerback, I think it's Arnold from Alabama. It changes everything. You're still able to probably get, a J.J. McCarthy or a Penix or something like that. So I just want to see your feelings, but I think that it's a chance to start building that roster and really building a bully on defense. And I think that we have the fire and we have, the coach that can do this for us. Just want to get your thoughts. Raider X out.
Thanks for the call, my man. And I feel like all efforts will be exhausted to get in position to grab QB1, Jaden Daniels. But if it doesn't work out, I think they have a great chance to grab a player that will really boost the squad and make them much, much tougher. Offensive line, defense, whatever the case may be, there are so many quality players, and I think the Raiders are in a really good position sitting there at number 13, number 44 in the second round. I think they really could build up this team quick, fast, and hurry, especially with guys that got edge to them, a little bit of attitude, guys that are going to play tough, strong, be real Raiders, right? And I think Antonio Pierce is going to be able to help identify exactly who those guys could be. I'm very excited about the direction that this team is going. Obviously, they got to go out there and they got to execute it, but it really does feel like they're in a really good position to build a team that we all expect them to build, a really good, competitive, strong, nasty, physical team. I believe that's what they're going to do. Raider X, thanks so much for that call. I appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Mike in PA. He says, hey, Q, Mike in PA here. I keep hearing people wanting the Raiders to bring in Russell Wilson. To quote AP, no more Band-Aids. In the entire history of the Raiders organization, they've only drafted one quarterback that has ever won a playoff game, the great Ken Stabler in '68. It's time to draft and develop a franchise quarterback that could win a championship. Go get him by any means possible. No more Band-Aids. Thanks. Keep up the great work. That's Mike in PA. And, yeah, I'm with you 100%. I agree. People have hit me with the Russell Wilson thing, and I think because of his salary and that his salary is probably going to be really cheap, I think that he's going to be a guy that's going to be under consideration. But you're right. AP said no more Band-Aids. Before Derek Carr, there was a lot of Band-Aids after Derek Carr. There could potentially be a lot of Band-Aids if they don't go find their guy. Now, I don't want them to go draft a guy just to draft a guy. I think Jaden Daniels makes a lot of sense. I think Michael Penix makes a lot of sense. And that's really where I leave it. I think that a guy like J.J. McCarthy might make sense. I wasn't really fired up by what we saw from him at the Combine. Sure wasn't fired up by what we saw from Bo Nix. Didn't like Bo Nix, his personality at all. And maybe he's a really good guy. I don't know. But when Vinny Bonsignor, my tag team partner there at Raider Nation Radio 920, didn't get a chance to talk to him at the podium, saw him walking by at the Combine and said, hey, just want to know, did you have a chance to meet with the Raiders? Have you talked to the Raiders? And he's like, I answered that question at the podium. Like, he was a real jerk about it. It took him actually more effort to give Vinny that answer as opposed to just saying yes or no. He could have easily said, yeah, I met with the Raiders. Or no, I didn't. But, I answered that question at the podium already. All right, well, then never mind. Jerk. Right? I mean, it just seemed like it was so much effort to be like nasty about it when he could have just answered the simple question. But okay. So not that takes away from his style of play and if he's going to be a good quarterback or not, but just kind of makes you feel like, all right, well, I'm sorry that we're here trying to do our job and trying to, get some intel and figure out what's going on. But all right. So I don't know. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way when he did that. But yeah, again, Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix, those are QB1 and QB2 for me. And then we'll see what happens after that. Thanks so much for that. Now, of course, side note, there are quarterbacks that could be had later rounds that maybe could develop into, QB1, just like Aiden O'Connell is there as, a quarterback that was drafted in the 4th round, and maybe he could develop. But that's just kind of one of those wait and see type situations. So thanks for that text. I appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Lodi, California Raider. He's calling to talk about quarterback Joe Milton from Tennessee. Speaking of guys that are mid-round quarterbacks, here he is, Lodi, California Raider.
Hey, what up, Q? Sunday afternoon here, and I'm looking forward to your show on Monday after watching the 2024 Combine. Everybody's been talking about all the top 6, 7 quarterbacks. I want your take on Mr. Milton. I know that he played for Tennessee last year, and I believe he played for Michigan before that. What do you or don't you know about him? I know he seems a little raw, but athletically, he's very gifted. Anyways, looking forward to your take. You're my boy Q, Lloyd, California Raider, out.
Thank you for the call, my man. And yeah, Joe Milton is intriguing. He's a project. There's no doubt about that. He can be a guy the Raiders draft in later rounds, just like they drafted Aiden O'Connell and, a year ago, and see what he's got. I mean, he's got a great head on his shoulders. I can tell you that. He's got a super strong arm. I think he threw the farthest ball at the Combine. He could be worth a pick later on just to see if he could develop into someone that could be a potential quarterback or maybe even a strong backup. But I'll say this, when I talk about his good head on his shoulders, here's a couple questions that I had for Joe Milton while he was at the podium at the Combine, and his answers, especially his answer about what he wanted to prove to the teams that were out there. I thought it was phenomenal from Joe Milton. Check it out.
What has this journey been like for you? Senior Bowl to being here, being in Tennessee. What's this whole journey been like?
It's been a ride, man. I love it. It's like a roller coaster. But, the biggest thing as a quarterback, you can't ride the roller coaster. You got to pretty much do the driving for itself. Try to stay a straight path, straight line. But, things going to happen. Injuries going to happen. Whatever it may be, it's going to happen. But it's life. It's part of life.
What do you want to prove to coach or teams this week here at the Combine?
Prove? I don't want to prove
or show
nobody. Was prove it to myself. Show that I'm capable of being in this position, capable to have this opportunity. So I don't want to prove nothing to nobody. I was that kid before, trying to prove things to people, and it didn't lead me nowhere. So just proving everything to myself and God.
So there you go, Joe Milton. I think he has a really good head on his shoulders. I do think he's a project type quarterback. He's probably a guy you can get in the 4th or 5th round, and that's cool, and see what he develops into. Again, he's got a super strong arm. You can see that his head's on right. He's a guy that, came in after and for Hendon Hooker when Hendon Hooker went down with the torn ACL, and then he ended up getting injured as well. But, I mean, he's a guy that can definitely play. He comes from that Josh Heupel offense, which, of course, that offense is, it's very quarterback friendly, especially in college. I don't know if it always translates into the NFL, but I think that Joe Milton's got a little something going, and he could be had probably like 4th, 5th, maybe in the 6th round, depending on how everything shakes out. But thanks so much for that. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Logan in PA. It says, Q, feels like Jaden Daniels or Michael Penix will be a Raider. That just feels right. If you can't move up and draft Jaden, then sit at 13 and take Penix. He said, my QB rankings, Caleb Williams, number 1, Jaden Daniels, number 2, Michael Penix, number 3, J.J. McCarthy, number 4, Drake May, number 5, and Bo Nix, number 6. Says Drake feels like the guy who'll be overdrafted based on size and traits. Penix is being underrated because of medical. I'm obsessed with his deep ball. It is awesome. That's Logan and PA. And yeah, that deep ball is pretty incredible. It really is. I mean, the way that he has that touch on that ball, it is phenomenal. And it's something that AP has talked about. He wants to be able to run the ball strong and be able to stretch the field. Well, you know that the Raiders have the run game. I'm assuming that they're going to bring Josh Jacobs back. There are talks about him being cool with the 1-year deal. I'd be surprised if he only got a 1-year deal, but maybe he's good with that. But I think Josh Jacobs returns. Zamir White's there. That run game is going to be solid. And if you have a guy like Penix throwing the ball down the field, stretching the field, I think the Raiders will be in great shape. Now, I think that they need to get a taller wide receiver, a speedster. I like Trey Tucker's speed, but I think you need a bigger guy to go and track the ball. But that's again, the wide receiver class is really deep as well. It's a luxury for the Raiders. It's not something that they have to go out and prioritize. But thank you so much for that text. I do appreciate you, and got time for one more call. We'll take this one from Big Al from Florida. He's calling to talk about all things NFL draft and potentially trading up, the good and the bad of it, and has a pretty good argument on why the Raiders might not want to do that as far as trading up. Here he goes, Big Al from Florida.
Yo, Q, Big Al from Bradenton, Florida. Longtime Raider fan, first-time caller. Love what you're doing with your show. Listen to you religiously. Wanted to touch on a couple of subjects that you were talking about regarding the Raiders and the draft. I heard what you were talking about so far as the package to move up to number 2, 3 number 1s, 2 number 3s, and if it's anything based on that rider from the Commanders, also possibly Hunter Renfrow. Listen, if they know for sure, or at least they know 100% in their hearts that that's the guy that they need to bring success to Vegas, then by all means. I am a big fan of the draft. I love getting as many picks as possible. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, the one thing that frightens me about taking or spending that much draft capital is Telesco's success in the first round. We're taking away at least 2 opportunities for him to show that here. Something that we've missed a long time. I mean, I almost felt like more times than not, previous organizations, they might as well have given their first round picks away to charity, because they definitely seem like wastes to me. However, I'm excited about how this goes. If we don't get a quarterback in the first round, I love the corners. I would like to see the kid from Toledo or the Tyrion from Bama, or even also Cooper DeJean, which might remind AP of Jason Sehorn. Anyways, my favorite passer in the draft is Penix. However, his injury history scares the bejesus out of me. But other than that, I've seen tape. He's just throwing darts all day. I love that. Anyways, man, looking forward to this season. Looking forward to the off season. Excited of the future of the Raiders. And all I can say, baby, is just win, baby. Raiders.
Thanks so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And yeah, I mean, the first round has been Tom Telesco's sweet spot, right? He's been able to grab some really good talent. So, yeah, if you trade up, you may be taken away from what he can do in the next couple of years, because to trade up and go get Jaden Daniels, you've got to give up the next couple of years first-round draft picks. But, again, if you're able to land your quarterback of the future, I think you do it. If you feel like Jaden Daniels is your guy and you've got to go make that move, go do it, right? It's been far too long that the Raiders actually went out of their way and went and got that quarterback. Found a guy and just targeted him. Of course, they've grabbed quarterbacks they haven't shooken out. And we all remember the first-round pick that they got, number 1 overall, Jamarcus Russell, that never panned out either. But for the most part, they haven't gone and really just targeted a guy that they really wanted. I think it would be great to go do that. But if they don't, like you said, man, you can stay there at number 13 and get some real quality players. I mentioned cornerback, offensive line, defensive line, defensive tackles. There are some really good dudes that could be had in this draft, especially at number 13 overall. I think the Raiders would have so many different options that they can help immediately build up their team. So, you're on the right path. We'll see what they do. Again, I think all options will be exhausted trying to get up in position to go get that quarterback. But if it just doesn't happen, then you may have to settle and do something else. And again, settling is probably not a bad thing given all the talent that's in this year's upcoming draft. But thanks so much for that call, Big Al. Definitely appreciate you. Got a text from Guar B that we'll get to, or Guareb that we'll get to tomorrow. Got a couple more calls as well. More news and notes. Happy to be back in Las Vegas, back from Indy. It went from being 70 to 28 real quick in Indy, and made me catch a little bit of a cold. But, man, after a day of Theraflu and just resting, I'm good to go. Glad to be back on the grind. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.